Okay, well, doing a little work on the Volvo today. It's got a grumbling wheel bearing on both sides, so I'm gonna replace both of them. And the cheap axles I bought are giving a little bit of shake, so they're both coming out. So lesson learned. I'm going with some Cardone axles that I hope will work better. They're rebuilt originals, so probably higher quality. First, get the brake caliper out of the way, tie it up so it doesn't strain the hose. The tie rod end bolt, nut that is. Doesn't fall out, and they never just fall out. Give it a couple of sharp bangs with a hammer. Should loosen it up. Make sure and don't hit the bolt itself, hit the chunk of metal it goes through. That'll shock it loose. Slowly loosen the control arm ball joint nut so that it's off, so that the top of the nut is above the bolt, and try smacking it with a hammer to see if it comes loose. Okay, it did, but the axle bolt, which is a fairly small 13mm unit, if you're replacing an axle, it will come with a new one. I believe you should always use a new bolt, as it's designed to stretch a certain amount during installation, which is fairly critical. I'm sure people get away without doing that, but off the dust shield, which is just 3 small 8mm nuts, bolts rather, down on the control arm to take the ball joint out of the knuckle. Keep in mind, just doing an axle, you don't need to take it this far, but since I have to pull the knuckle off, the tie rod end and the dust shield and the rotor and everything have to come off. Otherwise, I'd be done by now and having a cup of tea. Which is getting the strut disconnected from the knuckle. People struggle with that, but I'm going to show you a really cool trick for how to do that. It starts with removing this bolt altogether. Okay, next you just find some silly little piece of metal. In this case, I'm using a striker plate from an old door, and I'm sticking it in to the slot so that it will be in front of the bolt hole, and then I thread the bolt in from the back side of the knuckle, the opposite where it came out, until it contacts that piece of metal. And well up against the that piece of metal, just start applying some tension, and it will spread the, you can see it's already loose. It will spread the clamp that is clamped around the strut. You can see that the dirt bond has broken, and this will fall straight off, so I have to put the camera down so I don't hurt anything. That works much easier than trying to force it. One thing I would recommend is marking the strut where it came out so that you'll be able to put it back in at the same height, because that does affect the front end alignment slightly. So it will behoove you to make a mark there and put it back to the same point whenever you're reassembling everything. Not sure how much play this is supposed to have, but I'm relatively certain it's less than it actually does. I can definitely feel the shaft moving inside this rotationally. Just a bit of a fraction of a millimeter of movement, but that's probably going to be enough to cause the symptoms I'm getting, which is a pretty healthy shake. Not dramatic, but enough to be annoying. Gotta go. Clean up the inside of the knuckle where the new bearing gets pressed in, just so there's nothing fighting you and that there's nothing between the lip that locates the back of the bearing and the and the knuckle, because that could cause a very ever so slight alignment issue. You don't want to do that. Okay. And there it goes. Not before it cracked my stone block, but it held in there, so no harm done. Okay, I think it's out. And that's how it usually works. Removing the ABS sensor when you're pressing in the new one, just to make sure that nothing goes too far south. It's gonna be a little snug, but shouldn't be a problem getting it out. Bearings ready to be pressed in. Got it lined up as best I can. It's always a little tenuous, but I think it'll work. I'm having to press directly on the bearing. I'm sure there's a special tool to do this that allows you to avoid doing that, which would always be better. I got what I got, so this is how it gets done. I don't think it's going to be a particular problem. It's a pretty beefy bearing. And the other thing is, I just took this bearing out of the freezer where it's been for at least half an hour to make it a little smaller, which should make it a little easier to press in. So let's see how this goes. And it's going in a little crooked, so I've got to realign it. Progress, pushing it from a little off center the other direction. Got it what I think is pretty well lined up, so now I'm going to go back to center and press some more. Goes. It's going in pretty easy. Not even using the whole handle. It should press in and hit an obvious stop whenever the bearing is up against the back lip, and well, there it is. It's pretty clearly against that, so you can see the top of the bearing is flush with the knuckle. So I think we're there. I'll take it out and make absolutely sure. That's the result. It's in there. So everything looks good. Obviously did not booger up anything on the back side. What looks like it may be scraped there is just a little debris that's not really meaningful. There you go. See, I fixed it. Sensor goes in first. There's the old and the new, or the real new and then not quite so new, because the other one's only about 4 months old before it went south. You can see the difference in the design. The one on this side is the Cardon rebuilt. I have high hopes for it. It just looks like a beefier, better built part. Lord knows the other one didn't work out so well, so let's hope this works out better. Okay, I'm getting ready to slide the splines from the axle splines into the hub. And one little quick tip I would recommend is give it a little shot of synthetic grease, particularly those of you who don't live in the desert like I do, because that will tend to make the splines much happier, and they will be much less likely to give you a lot of grief next time you do this job. Hopefully that's never, but better to put a little extra grease in there just to keep things from rusting. Most new axles come with a new bolt. This one didn't, so I am going to have to reuse the old bolt. The good news is that most real Volvo mechanics will tell you that they'll reuse the bolt a few times. At any rate, it gets torqued to 25 foot-pounds and then turned 90 degrees. They recommend doing this with the wheel on the ground. I probably won't do it that way just because I'm feeling lazy, but that is the correct way to do it. So let's put it back together. Compromise on torquing up the nut on the axle. I'm going to actually use a nut and a hammer to keep the axle from rotating while I axle bolt, that is. It goes on, and then put the caliper back in place and bolt it together. New hub bearing, new axle, adjusted strut, and everything else is cleaned up. So ready for another 100,000 miles of trouble-free Volvo driving.